Well, I guess I'd better get these quiz questions done. I don't really have a lot of time, but I'm just gonna get them done and whatever. It's just a quiz. Okay, number one. Is the flute the same instrument as a lute? No. Let's see. Define what is meant by heterophony. Define it. It's musical texture. Okay. List 3 ways a tambourine can produce sound. Okay, you shake it. Okay, oops. Let's see. Compare this song, Postal Workers Gathering Stamps, that was that cool one, to the song I've Got a Letter. This has whistling and shaking scissors sounds. Explain the difference between polyphony and homophony. Is when everything happens together. Okay, describe a wedding zaffa. This isn't so hard. This quiz is not going to take very long. A wedding zaffa. Let's see. That's that doesn't look very complete. Maybe I'm gonna go to look something up and let's see. How about I'll just find something. She'll never know. Oh, here's the word zaffa. I'll just that looks good. All right, I'm just gonna stick it in there. Oh, well, I'll get rid of that part. And this part. And this part. Yeah, that's good. So I guess I'm done. Great. I'll just save this and I'm done. Cool. So this is a little tune written by my friend and colleague Sharantha Bedigay, and you sing it before you start taking an exam. I don't play it nearly as coolly as he does. Read the question. Read the question. Why won't you read the question? Read the question. Read the question. Please, please read the question. So, you want to answer these questions better? Maybe it's time to read the question. If you really read the structure of a question, the format and the way that the instructor has worded the question can really guide the way that you give an answer and thus show how much you actually understand and thus get more points. First of all, you might look to see if the question is a single part question or has multiple parts cleverly hidden into one line. For example, if the question asks you, is the flute the same instrument as a lute, and stops there, that's just a single part question. But if it goes on to ask why or why not, that's really two different things in one question. Then the next most important thing to do is to look at the verb in that question itself. A lot of the verbs in test questions are going to be commands, they're imperatives, because the instructor is telling you what you are going to do to answer that question. So it might be words like define, explain, describe, list, compare, anything like that. Once you figure out what the verb is trying to tell you or get you to do, give a look to the words after the verb. That is the object of the sentence or the objective clause. Define what? What am I supposed to define? Sometimes it's easy for our eyes to sort of skip hastily over the things that follow the verb and not really get all the parts of that object and really understand what it is being asked on that question. Very few questions are really designed to be trick questions. That's a popular sort of fallacy, I think, that professors love to ask trick questions. And maybe we do in memes and in online conversation and stuff. But unless the material has been focusing on telling the difference between something that is true and something that is false, or reading comprehension or something like that, then we're really probably not going to ask you a trick question. So even if the answer seems really obvious, give it, as long as you've read the question. Questions range from simple, medium, to complex in the way they evaluate or ask you to show what you know. A simple question is basically sort of what we might call knee-jerk tasks, like pick one in a multiple choice, or a true-false, or recognize something vaguely familiar. Don't we all do multiple choice a little bit that way? Which answer looks vaguely familiar to me? Maybe that's the one I choose. So a lot of instructors don't love these simpler choices because they don't really get the students to explain how much they know. Medium range questions would include words like list or describe. List 3 ways a tambourine can produce sound. Okay, or describe the wedding zaffa. Those are 2 medium level, medium complexity questions, and they allow you to give a fair amount of knowledge. The most complex level of question asking that we professors love to do are really our favorites, because it's helping you demonstrate how much you have thought about what you've learned in the lesson or the class or the lecture or the reading. And we really love for you to have learned and we really love for you to have thought about it. So you'll see words like compare, explain, link. Now, those kinds of verbs in a question require often multiple sentences, and they require clear writing. And I think you'll see in the demonstration that follows ways in which those complex answers need to be filled out and amplified and clarified so that you have the best success on a quiz. So we've talked about reading the question, but what about the other part of the song, check your answers? That's just as important because it's your last chance before you send those answers back to the professor. It's your last chance to make sure that the professor's going to understand what it is you're saying on the page. So let's start at the top. Do I have to write in a complete sentence? Well, not always. Sometimes it's just not necessary. If a question asks you to list 3 things, then just list them. But in other sorts of answers where you're explaining or describing or comparing, complete sentences are always a good idea. They can help clarify your answer so that the reader doesn't wonder what you're actually talking about. And it can actually help you clarify what you're writing about as you answer the question. That being forced to answer in a complete sentence makes you maybe stop and think a little bit more about what it is you're putting down on the page. in your answer, you have to make sure you've really followed that verb cue. Have you described something? Have you connected or explained it in enough depth? Or have you just sort of given a phrase that sounds like it maybe relates a little bit to the question? Sort of like recognizing a vocabulary word from a word wall, if you ever had to do that in elementary school. Well, maybe you need to go into more depth because the verb of the question is trying to urge you to get into that depth that's appropriate for whatever test question it is. If you're asked to describe or compare this or that, make sure your answer shows clearly what you're talking about. If it says, describe the ways a tambourine can produce sound, and you said shaking, jingling, and hitting, that's not quite a deep describe the way a tambourine can produce sound. How is it held? What am I hitting? Hitting what? Shaking what? Get into more depth. Likewise, if somebody asks you to compare, you have to make sure you've discussed both halves of the comparison. If I say compare apples to oranges, and you say oranges are orange, and you stop there, you haven't told me anything about apples. Now, in your mind, you might think, well, duh, everybody knows apples are not orange like oranges are. But you have to say it clearly on your test paper. When we're giving exams, we professors can't rely on any of your body language cues or facial expressions or even the flow of a classroom discussion that might have otherwise clued us in that you really do know what we're talking about. And even those things can be a little bit deceptive sometimes. It's easy to think that someone understands a topic, and they really don't, if it's not actually said out loud. So on a test paper, there is no body language at all. It's just you, and your writing has to convey back to me, the professor, what you know about the question. So if I say compare apples to oranges, make sure that you say, well, apples are a fruit that are often red on the outside with a white sweet inside, whereas oranges are orange on the outside with an orange sweet inside. That would be a good comparison. Okay, we're taking a lot of exams online now, and we're doing a lot of them without proctoring services because frankly they're expensive. So then, what's to stop you from copying and pasting from the book? Well, physically, probably very little. Morally, you shouldn't do it. But on the other hand, what if you do it? Let me give some answers to that have maybe a little bit more depth. If you simply copy and paste from the textbook, you're assuming that my whole goal in life is to see the right answer appear on a page, no matter who puts it there. And I hate to tell you, but as a teacher, my whole goal in life is not that. My whole goal in life is that you would have that answer inside you, that you would have read and taken notes and asked me questions and really understood the topic enough that you can in some way approach an answer. Maybe you worry that your answer won't sound scholarly enough. If you copy and paste it from the textbook, hey, look, there are all those long words already there. Well, it's fine if you know those long words yourself. If you've learned the vocabulary and you're comfortable with those very words that we've used in the chapter, then write them in your own sentences. If you're not sure what those words mean, then don't write them. Maybe you can describe the answer to the question in your own words, not using maybe all the terms that our textbook used. You know, I would be delighted if you did that. So, should you copy and paste from a book or a website? No, I really don't think you should. Why? Because it doesn't show me what is inside your head. And it's also plagiarism, which is an academic crime, so please don't do it. By copying and pasting, I have to say too, you also run the risk of not having exactly answered the question. Maybe you've just done a keyword search and you've Googled it and you've just pasted in something that seems approximately to answer the question. But a clever professor will reframe questions differently than the way they might have appeared in the book. And we do that on purpose. It's, in fact, exactly for that reason, to get you to have to think more about the topic and to show your own understanding and your own perspective. So copying and pasting something is often not very useful. So I guess the whole topic of your answers is definitely summed up in the second verse of the song. Check your answers. Let me just add on to the end of this a few strategies of how you can get better on test questions and essay questions before it's too late. I'm going to sort of work backwards. I'm going to start with the exam. Here's one strategy. On an exam, write out or diagram the question. That is, circle the verb, or actually, if it were me, I'd underline the verb twice. Put a box around the object so that you see with your eyes in a really visual way what is supposed to be answered. So actually draw on the page. Now, I guess if you're typing online, maybe you could highlight something or write it out by hand and then type it in. I know that sounds crazy. How old school is that? But if you're answering questions not very clearly, you might need a strategy like that, drafting something longhand, to help make your answers better. But what about before the exam? When you're studying? First of all, when you're studying, make notes. Actually, in your own hand. It's been proven. I hate to tell you, but the research is clear. Students taking notes by writing it down by hand themselves in an actual notebook work much, much better for learning and retention instead of just listening to a lecture and never taking notes and saying, I'll remember it. No, you won't. I wouldn't. And writing things down by hand works better even than typing notes on a laptop or even on a phone screen. It also works way better than simply making a recording of a lecture. So the idea is that you reprocess the information yourself by writing down notes by hand. I would really suggest, even though a lot of your classes may be a sort of blend of face-to-face and online right now, I would really suggest that you get a notebook, an actual paper notebook for each class, or a section of a notebook, and keep notes every class meeting you go to, whether it's synchronous, you sitting in your dorm, or you sitting in the classroom. It's going to be more urgent than ever for you to keep all your notes organized and methodical. When you take notes, write down important words, events, and terms that you might have to identify later. A good lecturer will make sure to emphasize those important words and terms by the way they speak, or the way they write them down, or even the way they highlight them in a video. Try to find the point of a section of content. If you're listening to a history lecture, what's the point of the last 15 minutes? Why did they spend time talking about this event or this time period? What are they trying to convey to you? Now, I will admit that we professors sometimes get off on a tangent, and so it's okay to ask, is this going to be on the test? Sure, that's reasonable. You could also ask, is this important for us to remember? That's a really great way to ask that question. The same thing happens when you're looking at a textbook. Say you're reading an online text or even a paper text. Guess what? You pull out your notebook and start a fresh page that explains to yourself that you're taking notes on a particular chapter or section. And in that notebook, list for yourself important words, events, and terms so that you can identify them in your notebook. In your notebook, then, make sure that you give yourself sort of the highlights, the key points that that textbook is trying to make. Often, with online textbooks especially, there will be visual cues on that screen that will show you what you're supposed to get. Sometimes you'll see at the beginning of a chapter the key objectives. Those are the points that you're supposed to take away with you. Use those points to help make good notes for yourself. In my class, what else would help you succeed on exams? Well, use the elements of music, or if it's relevant to the class, art or literature. In my classes, my humanities classes, I spend time at the beginning of each semester using the vocabulary that helps us describe musical and artistic events. So use those terms. Show in your answers that you've read the book, or read the article, or watched the video, or listened to the piece of music. Show me in your reflective answer that you have done that. In my humanities classes, I also often ask you to reflect on something, to give me your perspective, to give me your reaction to something. Take me up on that. Go through it and follow. I'm not in a reflecting kind of question. I'm not hoping for one particular answer. I want to see how you as a human engage with whatever the question is about. You can still give it in the context of our class experience. The things that we learn in class can certainly guide your reflection. But do dig in and reflect. Turn inside out a little bit and share with me your perspective. And, of course, when you get back to that exam, what should you do? Well, read the question. Maybe I'd better go back and look at some of these answers. I did it kind of fast. I still have time, so maybe before I submit this quiz, it's not 8 o'clock yet, so maybe I'll go back and read that question again. She kept playing that song. Okay. Is a flute the same instrument type as a lute? That's a yes or no question. But there's more. Why or why not? So it's a two-part question. And I put no. Well, it isn't the same. I mean, because it's not the same. It's a different instrument. Okay, no. The flute is a woodwind instrument that you blow into. Actually, you blow across it. But the lute is like a guitar and you strum the strings. That answers the yes or no, and it answers why it is not the same. Okay. Define what is meant by heterophony. It's a musical texture. Yeah, it is. It's musical texture. But why is she asking me that question? Is she asking it to me to say, so was she trying to get me to say it's a rhythm or a melody? Because it isn't, it's a texture. Maybe she was trying to get me to say more about it. It's a musical texture. We hear heterophony when people in a restaurant sing happy birthday and it comes out all different sounding. Oh, I just spelled that wrong. Different sounding, even though it's the same song. Yeah, that's good. Okay, list 3 ways a tambourine can produce sound. I said you shake it. Well, you do. You shake it. I could just say, okay, 3 ways. I gave 1 way. You shake it, you hit it, you run that. There's this weird thing people do with their thumb to make a roll, rattly sound. Okay, you shake it. I could give more depth to my answer. It wouldn't hurt. And the jingles rattle. You hit the skin of the tambourine with your fingers to make a tapping sound. Let's see, you drag your thumb along the head of the tambourine to make a vibrating, jingling sound. That's better. Compare the song Postal Workers Gathering Stamps to the song I've Got a Letter. Well, they're not even the same kind of song. Postal Workers has whistling and shaking scissor sounds. I've Got a Letter is a big band song that uses like saxophones and trumpets. They are from different parts of the world. Postal Workers was that people used to make their work time go by in a more interesting way. The other song was for dancing in a dance hall. Okay. Explain the difference between polyphony and homophony. Homophony is when everything happens together. That's true. Polyphony is when things happen. There are different things happening that just sort of happen at the same time. I didn't say that, did I? Okay, polyphony is when there is more than one melody to hear happening at the same time. My answers are getting longer. Huh. Describe a wedding zaffa. Wow. Well, I didn't really think about it before I pasted in this answer. I guess if I have to word it in my own ways, I would say this is a celebration in Morocco. It lasts all day, and the bride and groom wear many different outfits throughout the day. Okay, I described a little bit about where it is and who's in it. One of the elements has to relate to music. Women following the bride play the bandir drum as part of the musical texture of the... That's much better. Now I can submit these.